Is a fanatical doomsday cult responsible for pushing the world toward nuclear destruction? That's the question I want to ask today. And it's a question I think too few are asking. Where am I going? We talked before about a force behind the idols of this world, a force behind the rulers of this world, a force behind the religious leaders of this world. And oftentimes, this force is referred to in both esoteric and biblical terms as the snake. And we are going to consider the head of this snake. So, one of the recent uh, depictions we have of world events is this binary between these two world leaders. What is the force behind both of them? Is there a common force? And what I'd like to introduce right now is a method of social science inquiry that approximates scientific inquiry. We have the different variables, and we think of them in relative terms, in terms of how they influence the outcome. And for example, in the sciences, how do we get a plant that's 10 feet tall? We can consider the soil, the sun, the water. We can produce an experiment that's reproducible and put it in different environments around the world and make sense of how these variables have relative influence on the independent variable. So when I say this rather dramatic opening about a fanatical doomsday cult, I want to put it in some sort of um, context or in some sort of relation to other influences on world events. And I have argued throughout the course, Esoteric Biopolitics and the New World Order, and in my observation about events unfolding in the world today, that the Venetian oligarchy, if we think of all these possible influences, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, the Catholic Church, and all these things, I have found that the Venetian oligarchy is the variable that sort of unlocks the other variables. All the variables tend to be connected with this. I encourage anybody to look at any historical accounts over the last at least thousand centuries at the Venetian oligarchy and how their influence is consistent with major events of what we call world history. So far I've talked about the Venetian oligarchy and a particular strain within this that arose in 1666, which we called Sabbatean Frankism. And this particular strain, we said, looked to bring about a Messiah. It's a messianic strain within the Venetian oligarchy. And they would do this through degrading the human population, dumbing it down and degrading it and making it evil, introducing evil, tempting people with evil in order to bring in a Messiah. Cited a number of sources, scholarly as well as rabbinical, uh, to demonstrate that that force is still in play today. Zionism, a further extension of the Sabbatean strain of Venetian oligarchy, designed to create a homeland for the Messiah. And now I would like to introduce the idea of Chabad Leibovich as a force to bring about a prophesied apocalypse in order to bring about a prophesized Messiah. Again, the idea of a snake is consistent throughout biblical and esoteric literature. I before mentioned the idea of Christ going head to head with the oligarchy of his day. The biblical view on this is Jesus Christ's death and resurrection fulfilled the first prophecy of the Bible. I will put enmity between the two seeds. So, in that sense, the snake was broken apart, but was still left in charge of the world. What we see with this messianic strain within the Venetian oligarchy is this idea of bringing the snake together into a singularity or a oneness, an exceptionally Kabbalistic idea. Again, we're juxtaposing a biblical idea, God standing outside of creation, with this idea that is atomistic, reductionistic, pantheistic, that God is in a million pieces in all of us, but it has to be brought into a oneness. Okay, so I want to suggest here that one of the critical variables in the Venetian oligarchy is, of course, the international bankers. And if we want to look at that genealogy from the present day into the ancient world, there's no better way to look than the sets of families that have had a monopoly on usury from the ancient world. And again, this for me is the variable that unlocks all the other variables, from the alphabet agencies to the military industrial complex to the media, all hook into the banking system. And that banking system is a product of the Venetian oligarchy. The bankers in the United States that brought in our central banking reserve were all connected to this Venetian oligarchy. And when we have all of these statements from presidents, Supreme Court justices, and congressmen over the years, they're essentially talking about this same set of families that I have termed the Venetian oligarchy. Jackson, Jefferson, even Washington, stating that if you allow the banks and their corporations to enter and perform their function in the United States, there will be no democracy. Okay, it will be all but an illusion. The founding fathers actually said that and set up a republic in order to protect this form of government from oligarchy. Jackson famously called them a den of vipers, multi-headed. It has many heads. It seems to have a similar body. And the quotes on and on. Roosevelt, the international bankers, their oil interests form the invisible government. You cannot run out. There's hundreds of these, and this is only the United States. They occur, again, with justices, parliamentary representatives, and executives from around the world. This is just a little handset of these. I'll actually read this one. I like this. The drive of the Rockefellers and their allies is to create a one world government combining supercapitalism and communism under the same tent, all under their control. Do I mean conspiracy? Yes, I do. I am convinced there is such a plot, international in scope, generations old in planning, and incredibly evil in intent, says Congressman Larry, oops, I fell down the memory hole. And again, the idea here is when you have control, monopoly over usury, and can control, you can control of these central banking systems, that it's in your interest to create recessions and depressions. Why? As Carol Quigley said, so you pick up the pieces and increasingly consolidate your power, pulling it from public regimes of power into private hands. Again, the real menace to our republic, the octopus, another sort of separate but together in some sense, coordinated in some sense. A great one here from the mayor of New York about this cadre of power. Another great one here from Barry Goldwater, the Trilateral Commission, these international bankers and their international organizations all operating to pull together this one world system. You simply can't run out of quotes to this effect if one cares to look. The Council on Foreign Relations, of course, the Rockefeller's own quotes, and on and on. So again, I want to introduce the social science method of sort of sorting through the variables and looking at their relative weight. So when I say something like a fanatical end times cult in charge or at the head of the snake, I want to do it with some sort of measurement or tool of measurement.